2 million years ago, the world was already ancient. The Earth had turned beneath the same sun for more than 4 billion years, shaping mountains, shattering continents, breathing life into oceans and forests, and taking it away again. Entire empires of creatures had risen and vanished long before the first human breath. But now, in the vast plains of East Africa, something different stirred. A species not defined by strength, speed, or armor, but by awareness. They did not yet know what they were becoming, only that every sunrise demanded a choice. Run, fight, or die. These were the early hominids, small, upright primates who had stepped away from the safety of the trees and into the open savanna. Their bones tell us their story: a narrow waist, long legs, and curved hands still suited for climbing. They were Australopithecus afarensis, and they lived balanced between two worlds, one of branches and safety, and one of grass and danger. The savanna was no gentle cradle. It was a kingdom ruled by predators. Saber-toothed cats, hyenas larger than any today, crocodiles that waited at every river crossing. Even the wind carried the scent of death. For the first humans, every sound, every rustle, every shadow could mean survival or extinction. Their world was harsh, but it shaped them. Their senses sharpened. Their eyes scanned the horizon not for opportunity, but for threats. They learned to recognize patterns: the silence before a lion's approach, the flight of birds that betrayed a predator's path. This was not knowledge written in books. It was written in fear. Still, they endured. They lived in small groups, bound by instinct more than reason. Together, they searched for roots, fruit, and insects, anything that would keep them alive another day. Food was scarce, and hunger was their oldest companion. Sometimes they followed the paths of larger animals, waiting for leftovers from kills they did not make. They used stones to crack open the bones of carcasses, seeking the fatty marrow inside, the most concentrated source of energy in their world. That simple act, born from desperation, may have been one of the first sparks of intelligence. To break, to plan, to adapt, it was the earliest whisper of human thought. We know from fossil evidence that this behavior marked a turning point. For millions of years, our ancestors had eaten what nature offered. Now they had begun to take from nature, to alter it. That shift, though small, set the course of evolution. In those early days, communication was primitive, a chorus of grunts, gestures, and expressions. Yet within those sounds, meaning began to grow. A warning cry, a signal to run, a gesture to share food. This was the beginning of language, not yet words, but understanding. And in that understanding lay the foundation of something greater: cooperation. One alone could not survive long, but together they could watch, defend, and learn. Around them, the savanna stretched endless and merciless, but in their eyes, for the first time, flickered something beyond instinct: a spark of awareness. Paleoanthropologists believe that this growing intelligence was not just biological. It was forged by the challenges of their environment: predation, climate change, scarcity. Each pressure selected for those who could think, plan, and anticipate. Fear, paradoxically, made us human. Imagine them at dusk. A family of 7 huddled in the fading light, the air thick with the cries of distant predators. The ground is cold beneath them. The scent of wet grass and ash lingers from a lightning fire that burned days before. The youngest stirs, hungry. The mother watches the horizon. In that moment, in the silence between heartbeats, lies the essence of our origins. Every emotion we know, fear, love, hope, grief, began in these moments. The first humans did not have civilization, or faith, or art, but they had each other. They had the will to endure. Their footprints, discovered at Laetoli in modern Tanzania, tell us something profound. They walked side by side, adult and child, step for step. Across volcanic ash hardened by time, they left evidence not of tools or weapons, but of connection, a family walking together through a dangerous world. That single trail of footprints, preserved for nearly 4 million years, is more than archaeology. It's testimony. It tells us that long before language or fire, before conquest or invention, survival itself was an act of unity. This was the forgotten dawn of humanity, a time before memory, before myth, when every life was a fragile thread woven into the endless tapestry of evolution. They did not know what they were becoming, but each step, each choice to fight instead of flee, pushed them closer to what we would one day call human. We like to imagine that intelligence was our greatest gift, but in truth, it was forged in struggle. It was the price of fear, the cost of survival, and in that cost lay the foundation of everything we are today. Hunger has always been the architect of change. For our ancestors, it was not just an ache in the stomach. It was the force that shaped their evolution, their choices, their minds. 2 million years ago, hunger ruled everything. The climate was shifting. Africa was drying, forests shrinking, and the wide open plains expanding. Fruit-bearing trees became rarer. Roots and insects could no longer feed entire groups. Those who survived were the ones willing to adapt, the ones who looked at the impossible and tried anyway. Among them was a new kind of hominid, Homo habilis, the handyman. Slightly larger-brained than Australopithecus, he was still small, still vulnerable, but different in one crucial way. He had begun to shape the world with his hands. Stone flakes, sharp as razors, were struck from river pebbles. These were the first true tools, simple but revolutionary. To strike one stone against another was to take control of chance. It meant they no longer waited for nature's leftovers. They made opportunity with their own hands. With these sharp edges, they could carve flesh, break bone, and reach what few others could: the marrow, the hidden gold of nutrition. This change seemed small, but it ignited an evolutionary chain reaction. The marrow, rich in fat and calories, fueled a growing organ, the brain. Over generations, that brain expanded, demanding more energy, which in turn demanded more food. A feedback loop that would shape the destiny of humanity. Intelligence was not a luxury. It was survival's investment. Each tool, each spark of creativity, gave an edge to those who could think just a little faster, plan just a little further ahead. And slowly, thought began to replace instinct. Paleoanthropologists can see this transformation written in the bones. In fossils of Homo habilis, the skull grows rounder, the brain cavity expands. The hands too change. The thumb becomes stronger, more flexible, capable of precision grip. The anatomy of survival was rewriting itself. But adaptation was not uniform. Some groups clung to the forests, eating what they always had. Others ventured further into the plains, scavenging carcasses left by lions and hyenas. They followed the vultures, those circling beacons in the sky that promised both danger and food. Every meal was a gamble. In that harsh world, death and opportunity walked side by side. To feed meant to risk being fed upon. Imagine them approaching the half-eaten carcass of an antelope, bones cracked by a lion's jaws. The air smells of blood and heat. Flies swarm thick as dust. They wait, watching, listening, until the predators move off. Then, quickly, they descend, tearing, cracking, scraping, before the hyenas return. This was survival, measured in moments. And yet, this dangerous act would change everything. Meat and marrow delivered dense calories, energy enough to sustain a larger brain, longer migrations, more complex social structures. Diet was destiny. The path from scavenger to hunter had begun. But hunger is not just physical. It drives innovation. It demands foresight. Those who could remember where fruit trees bloomed last season, who could predict when herds migrated, who could communicate that knowledge to others. They lived. Knowledge itself became a survival tool. Around shared meals, primitive communication evolved. Gestures turned into sounds, sounds into meaning. To share food was to share thought. And in that sharing, culture, in its earliest form, was born. What we call humanity did not appear overnight. It grew, meal by meal, discovery by discovery. The spark of tool-making was not a single event, but a language of necessity passed through generations. A mother showing her child how to strike stone. A father teaching the safest path to a carcass. The young learning that courage and caution were the same skill. We often imagine evolution as progress, a climb toward perfection. But in truth, it is improvisation. The story of early humans is one of endless adaptation. Each hunger met with a new solution, each danger with a new idea. They were not the strongest species, nor the fastest, nor the fiercest, but they were the most curious. And curiosity, guided by hunger, became the engine of their survival. As Homo habilis spread across the ancient landscape, the savanna began to change too. Their presence shaped the ecosystem. Bones with cut marks appeared alongside those of lions and hyenas. Where once only predators dined, humans now stood beside them. They had entered the food chain, not as prey, but as participants. Still, life was fragile. Disease, injury, famine, these could erase an entire group within days. But even extinction could not stop the momentum of evolution. Each success, however small, was carried forward. Each failure, a lesson etched into DNA. And so, through hunger, through need, through endless struggle, humanity began to rise. Not in triumph, but in persistence, in the will to find meaning in suffering. It's humbling to imagine that the very brain used to build cities, create art, and question the universe was born from the simple act of breaking a bone for marrow. That every invention, every dream, every whisper of civilization traces back to that moment, when hunger met ingenuity and survival became creation. For millions of years, the night had belonged to others, to the hunters, to the eyes that gleamed in the dark, to the unseen things that waited beyond the grass. But one day, perhaps by chance, perhaps by courage, the darkness changed. A storm rolled across the African plains. Lightning split the sky, striking a dry tree. In an instant, the savanna burned. The air was filled with heat, smoke, and light unlike anything the early humans had ever seen. They watched from a distance, terrified but mesmerized. It was death and life made visible. No one knows when our ancestors first approached the flames. Perhaps a small child wandered too close to the glowing embers of a burnt bush. Perhaps a hunter followed the scent of roasted meat after a wildfire. Whatever the moment, it would mark a transformation unlike any before it. At first, fire was not tamed. It was observed, feared, respected. The earliest humans likely carried smoldering branches from natural fires, using them until the embers died. This was not mastery, but guardianship. They became keepers of a force they did not understand. Archaeological sites in Kenya and South Africa, such as Kubi Fora and Swartkrans, show traces of ancient hearths, charred bones, and burnt stones more than 1.5 million years old. They are silent witnesses to a discovery that would forever separate humanity from the rest of life on Earth. For the first time, night lost its power. The flicker of flame pushed back the darkness and the predators that ruled it. The fire became both weapon and comfort. Warmth in cold winds, safety against beasts, light for those who had only ever known shadow. But fire was more than survival. It was transformation. It changed what they ate, how they lived, and how they thought. Cooked food released more nutrients, made digestion easier, and provided energy to fuel the ever-growing human brain. Each meal by the fire was a silent revolution in biology. The warmth drew them closer together. Around its light, groups gathered not just for protection, but for connection. Communication grew, and with it, something new. Culture. Shared stories, lessons, warnings, all passed through the glow of the flames. In the dancing light, memory itself was born. Fire also changed time. Before it, darkness ended the day. After it, the night became a place of thought. By firelight, humanity began to imagine. And yet, fire was a double-edged gift. For every tribe that learned to keep it alive, others burned, because they could not control it. Too much wind, too little care, and the very thing that protected them could erase them. Mastery came slowly, over thousands of generations, through trial and tragedy. Imagine them. A small group huddled around a glowing log, the embers pulsing like the heart of the earth itself. Their faces are red with reflected light. Beyond them, the savanna breathes, silent, alive. The night predators pace at the edge of the circle, confused by this new enemy that does not sleep. For the first time in history, the darkness retreats. This moment, repeated in countless variations, became a ritual of survival. Every dawn began with the question, did the fire live? Keeping it burning was keeping life itself. Children learned to feed the embers with dried grass and twigs. Adults learned to guard it from rain. The spark became a symbol of continuity, the link between generations. In many ways, the story of fire is the story of consciousness. To protect it was to plan. To nurture it was to care. To share it was to trust. Through it, humanity learned foresight, the ability to think beyond the present moment. And that ability, more than any physical change, was the birth of intelligence. Scientists believe that Homo erectus, the upright man, was the first true firekeeper. Taller, stronger, and with a larger brain than his predecessors, he was the first to walk out of Africa's cradle and into the wider world. Fire made that possible, allowing him to survive cold nights, cook food, and light the way through unfamiliar lands. It's easy to underestimate how profound that was. With fire, humans no longer adapted to their environment. They began to adapt the environment to themselves. It was the first act of dominance over nature, the first whisper of civilization. Every invention since, every tool, every city, every dream, is, in some way, a reflection of that first flame. The moment when fear turned into understanding, when the Earth's most fragile creature found a way to harness destruction and turn it into creation. If hunger forged the human brain, then fire forged the human spirit. It gave us warmth, safety, and community, but also responsibility. It taught us that power must be protected, or it will consume us. Even now, when we look into the glow of a campfire, something ancient stirs. The sound, the heat, the shifting light. It speaks to a memory, older than language. A memory of the night when darkness first surrendered, and humanity began to dream. With fire came courage, and with courage came ambition. The creatures that once scavenged at the edges of the kill now began to imagine something unthinkable, becoming the hunter. It was not strength that made it possible, it was unity. Where a lion relied on claws and speed, early humans relied on planning. They learned to move together, to read the landscape, to anticipate the movements of prey. The hunt was not chaos, it was cooperation. This change marks one of the most profound turning points in our evolution. From fragments of bone and stone tools scattered across ancient riverbeds, archaeologists can trace a story of transformation. At sites like Olorgesailie in Kenya and Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, we find the remains of large game, zebra, antelope, even elephant, alongside shaped stone hand axes. These tools were not the desperate implements of scavengers. They were weapons. For the first time, humanity was no longer simply surviving within nature's order. It was beginning to rewrite it. Hunting was dangerous. It required patience, communication, and trust. A single mistake could mean death. But when successful, the reward was immense. Meat, fat, hides, and bones that could sustain entire groups for days. It also demanded something new. Foresight. The ability to imagine outcomes before they happened. To hunt meant to plan, and planning meant to think beyond instinct. That is the true birth of the human mind. Picture them now, a group of 10 or 12, standing at the edge of the savannah as the sun rises. Their bodies lean, strong, marked by scars. Each carries a sharpened hand axe, a crude spear hardened in the fire. Ahead of them, a herd of antelope grazes. The wind is right. They wait for a signal, a gesture, a sound. Then they move, swift and coordinated. The chase begins. They cannot outrun their prey, but they can outlast it. Through sheer endurance, through tracking and persistence, they drive the animal to exhaustion. It collapses. The hunt is won not by power, but by patience. This technique, known today as persistence hunting, may be one of humanity's oldest and most defining strategies. Our ancestors learned to use what no other predator could: endurance, teamwork, and the relentless will to continue. It was this same will that forged empathy. Hunting required cooperation, and cooperation required understanding. They began to recognize one another's strengths and weaknesses. Who could track? Who could strike? Who could lead? This recognition, this social awareness, was the foundation of human society. The hunt also demanded communication. Grunts and gestures evolved into structured signals, a shared language of sound and movement. Through this, early humans began to think collectively. Each idea, each experience, was no longer trapped within one mind. It could be passed between many. Knowledge became shared memory. This, too, left traces in the fossil record. Around this time, the human brain grew dramatically, from roughly 600 cubic centimeters in Homo habilis to nearly 900 in Homo erectus. That increase wasn't just biological, it was behavioral. Every hunt, every fire, every shared victory or loss added new layers of understanding. Learning was becoming inheritance. But the rise of the hunter also changed humanity's relationship with death. To take a life was to confront mortality, to see in the eyes of the dying animal a reflection of one's own fragility. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans developed rituals even then, gestures of respect, patterns of behavior that hint at the beginnings of empathy and meaning. In their minds, survival was no longer just instinct. It was purpose. Each kill, each meal, was part of something larger, the story of a species learning its place in the world. Fire turned the night into safety. Hunting turned survival into identity. Together, they gave rise to the first spark of dominance, the understanding that the world could be shaped by will. In the remains of ancient campsites, scientists find evidence of organized spaces, areas for tool making, food preparation, resting, and gathering. This was structure, the embryo of community. It was here, in these simple camps, that the first forms of social order appeared. At night, around the fire, they shared food and stories, perhaps of the hunt, perhaps of what lay beyond the hills. In those flickering shadows, ideas took form. A sense of belonging grew, not just to a group, but to something greater, to humanity itself. But power always carries danger. To control nature is to depend upon it even more deeply. As the hunters spread, they began to exhaust the lands around them. They moved farther and farther, following herds, learning the rhythms of migration, and crossing landscapes that no hominid had ever dared to traverse. Step by step, they pushed into new territories, rivers, forests, mountains, testing the limits of endurance and adaptability. These journeys would not end in Africa. They were the first whispers of migration, the footsteps that would one day lead across continents. In Homo erectus, we see the culmination of this transformation. The body built for walking long distances, the hands for crafting, the mind for thinking ahead. He was the first true traveler, the first explorer, from prey to hunter, from scavenger to strategist, from follower of nature to its student, and slowly, its master. The rise of the hunter was not a conquest of the world, but a conquest of fear. And in overcoming that fear, humanity began to understand itself. For nearly 2 million years, the heart of humanity had beaten in Africa. It was here that our species learned to stand, to hunt, to harness fire. But survival is never still, and the world was changing once again. The climate grew colder, the rains less predictable. The green plains that once fed entire families turned to dry grass and dust. Rivers shrank, herds migrated, and the horizon, once familiar, became empty. Necessity, as always, whispered one command: move. And so they walked. From the valleys of East Africa, groups of Homo erectus began their slow exodus, following rivers north, crossing unknown lands, chasing herds and seasons. They didn't know they were leaving their birthplace forever. They only knew that to stay was to die. Their journey was not a march, but a drift, across centuries, across continents, from Africa into the Middle East, from the Levant to Asia, from the tropics into the chill of the Eurasian plains. Wherever they went, they adapted, as they always had. Each step tested the limits of what a body and mind could endure. They faced freezing nights, violent storms, predators unlike any they had seen before. But they carried something no other creature did: fire, memory, and the shared will to survive. It's easy to forget how monumental this migration was. For the first time, a species began to inhabit the entire world. And it wasn't strength that carried them. It was endurance. The same endurance that had kept their ancestors alive through hunger and fear now propelled them across continents. The evidence of their passage remains scattered across the world. Stone tools buried beneath layers of sediment. Fire-blackened caves in Georgia, China, and Indonesia. Each discovery is a footprint in deep time, proof that Homo erectus became the first true global wanderer. But migration changed more than their geography. It changed their minds. To survive in new lands required foresight. They learned to read the sky, to remember the routes of migrating herds, to recognize seasons. The brain that had grown through hunger now learned patience and planning. They met new challenges: cold, distance, isolation. In colder climates, they used animal hides for warmth, perhaps the earliest form of clothing. They began to shelter in caves, using fire not only for protection, but for life itself. Firelight against ice, a fragile barrier between extinction and existence. Imagine them, a small group of wanderers walking across an endless plain of wind and frost, their breath turning to mist, their footprints freezing in snow. Behind them, the warmth of Africa fades. Ahead of them, the unknown. Every step, a gamble. Every night, a prayer that the embers still glow by morning. This journey was not just physical, it was psychological, the forging of endurance, the birth of resilience. For the first time, humans had to imagine a future beyond sight. They had to believe that beyond the next mountain, beyond the next valley, life would continue. That belief, that unseen hope, became part of what it meant to be human. Over generations, these wanderers evolved further. The brain continued to expand. Communication grew more complex. The rhythm of survival became the rhythm of culture. We see traces of this in the tools they left behind. No longer were they simple flakes or crude edges. Now there were symmetrical hand axes, elegant, balanced, deliberate. A design repeated across continents, from Africa to Europe to Asia. It was a universal language of intelligence, spoken in stone. And with this intelligence came something new: awareness of death. Burial sites from later Homo erectus populations suggest that they began to care for their dead, to place bodies carefully, even protectively. This may have been the first whisper of spirituality, the idea that life continued beyond the body, a quiet defiance of extinction. The wanderers didn't just survive, they spread ideas, instincts, and innovations. Each generation carried knowledge further, passed down through firelight and memory. Across the centuries, this inheritance became our greatest weapon. Not claws, not teeth, but learning itself. When modern humans eventually appeared, long after Homo erectus, they would find a world already marked by those first travelers. Caves that had seen fire, trails beaten by bare feet, bones buried beneath layers of time. The map of humanity had already been drawn, not by empires, but by wanderers who refused to stand still. We often think of home as a place, but for early humans, home was motion. It was the journey itself, the path that linked survival and discovery. Their courage was not found in conquering the world, but in walking into it, step by uncertain step. Even now, the echoes of their footsteps remain within us. The restless urge to explore, to move, to seek what lies beyond the horizon. It is the same instinct that drove our ancestors from Africa 2 million years ago. The same drive that once carried them through deserts and mountains now carries us into oceans, into skies, into space. We are still wanderers, shaped by distance, defined by movement. And though the landscapes have changed, the truth has not. To be human is to keep walking, to search for life, even when the path is unknown, to carry the flame forward, no matter how far the journey leads. The journey that began in fear and hunger did not end with Homo erectus. From their endurance came something new, something that would forever alter the story of life on Earth. Out of their lineage, around 300,000 years ago, a new species emerged, Homo sapiens. Us. We were not stronger than those who came before us. We were not faster, nor more resistant to pain. But we were different, shaped by everything that had come before. The fire, the hunt, the endless migrations, all had sculpted a mind unlike any the world had seen. Our brains were larger, yes. But it was not just size that mattered. It was connection. The ability to imagine, to remember, to dream, to see a world that did not yet exist, and then build it. From this imagination came language. True language. Not just sounds of warning or gestures of need, but stories. And stories became our greatest tool. Through them, we shared experience across generations, across distances, across time. Knowledge no longer died with the individual. It became immortal. That ability to learn from the dead changed everything. The first modern humans carried this gift across Africa, painting their world with ideas. They crafted finer tools, shaped from stone, bone, and antler. They learned to hunt not just through strength, but through cooperation and strategy. They built shelters, fashioned clothing, and turned survival into community. Then, once again, they walked. Out of Africa, following in the footsteps of Homo erectus, spreading into the Middle East, Asia, and beyond. But unlike their ancestors, they carried something else with them. Culture. They left art, carvings, pigments, symbols. They began to see the world not only as a place to survive, but as a canvas. In caves across Europe and Africa, they painted animals, stars, and spirits, images that still speak across tens of thousands of years. These were not random drawings. They were meaning, expression, faith. The mind had turned inward and asked, for the first time, who are we? With this question came empathy, morality, and myth, the invisible architecture of civilization. Around fires, stories grew into beliefs, beliefs into rituals, rituals into culture. The same fire that had once frightened our ancestors now burned in our minds. But progress never comes without struggle. Alongside imagination came conflict. The same intelligence that built weapons for the hunt would soon build them for war. We learned not only to survive nature, but to shape it, even to destroy it. The price of awareness was consequence. Still, our journey was irreversible. In less than 300,000 years, Homo sapiens would spread to every corner of the world, crossing deserts, glaciers, and oceans. From the first tools of stone to the first sparks of thought, the species that once huddled in fear beneath lightning now harnessed power from the atom and light from the stars. Yet, beneath all this progress, the same ancient pulse remains. The instincts of those first beings, fear, curiosity, hope, still beat within us. We are built from their struggle, forged in the same fire. Look at your own hands, the same shape that once held a shard of stone, trembling as a lion roared beyond the grass. That fear still lives within us, and so does the courage that overcame it. Our story is not one of triumph, but of persistence. We endured droughts, predators, ice ages, and extinction. We adapted. We evolved. We remembered. Every ancestor who survived long enough to pass on life added another thread to the tapestry that became us. And though we stand now in a world of steel and electricity, the echoes of those early struggles never left. When firelight dances in our eyes, when thunder shakes the ground, when we tell stories to one another under the night sky, we remember. Somewhere deep within, the first humans still walk beside us. They whisper in our instincts, in our fears, in our dreams. They remind us that everything we are, every thought, every creation, every act of love or defiance, was born in the same soil that once cradled them. This is our inheritance. Not wealth, not comfort, but endurance. The ability to hope when there is no reason, to create when destruction surrounds us, to rise again and again, no matter how many times the world burns. We are the children of fire and fear, the heirs of hunger and dust. And though 2 million years have passed, the struggle that made us human still defines us. For it is not peace that shapes greatness, but adversity. Not light that forges strength, but the darkness we dare to face. And in that darkness, long ago, a fragile creature lit a spark that would one day become the fire of the human soul. That fire still burns. It burns in every one of us.